would be replacement of building stage curtains, and then for athletic equipment, football sleds, things of that nature are included in the athletic funding portion and the academic portion of the BTA-5 capital levy. Next slide. So in summary, for our BTA-5 capital levies, is we will be making a recommendation to our school board of a levy that is $765 million to be collected over 6 years. It will address priority 1 projects. It will have a value of 46 cents per thousand of appraised value, which is a 3-cent increase over our BTA-4 capital levy in 2016. And again, I just want to highlight that the district in 2020, in response to the COVID pandemic, went to one-to-one technology, and a significant portion of that increase is related to technology to support the one-to-one computer distribution for our students. So next slide. So next steps are we're going to be having another levy meeting this week on Thursday. We'll be sharing questions and comments with our school board. We are anticipating that the school board will make a decision concerning the levy on November 3rd of 2021, and then the levy will be placed before the voters February 8th of 2022 to allow the public to make a decision about the EPO and the BTA-5 capital levy. Next slide. And Tina, I think this is where I turn it back to you.
That is correct. Hi again, everybody. We're going to move on now to our question and answer session. We'll unmute you when you're called on, and you can still put questions in the chat as we go along. Next slide, please. To raise your hand, if you don't know how, click the hand button in your controls. And to get to the chat, you can use the icon button with a little circle around it next to the hand. We would like to focus on questions and comments about levy planning. If you make comments, please limit yourself to less than 2 minutes to allow everyone the chance to speak or ask questions. Keep in mind that this is not a forum for public testimony to the school board. Please use our online Let's Talk feedback form to submit information you wish to share with the board, or visit the school board web pages for board contact information. More information about the levies and the levy planning is posted on the web page. It will be updated as the district moves forward, and the Let's Talk feedback form link can be found at the top of the page or in the right-hand subpages. So to get started, I see some hands raised. Let's see, Mike McDonald, I'm going to allow your mic, and you can unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Hi, yeah, thank you, and thanks for the presentation. I think from the last slide, I understood that content for the capital levies, for the next capital levy, is decided by November. Is there a way to, or what do you recommend as I'm a new parent with SPS, how do you recommend I propose projects or influence the content? And if that deadline is looming, does that mean that any projects that I have in mind are sort of pushed back another 6 years, or, sorry, any clarification would help. Thanks.
So I'll take that question, Tina. And just note that Seattle Public Schools runs a capital levy every 3 years. We do have a list of proposed projects that we have that have been identified really through a third-party consultant, and some school board priorities and conversations with the school board. I would say that we have a Let's Talk feature that you could share your ideas, Mike, with capital projects and planning. We could look at those ideas and then email back to you a response. But we do have opportunities to provide feedback on our capital levies through Let's Talk. And Tina can provide more information. I think also the web link noted below on this last slide, you can provide feedback on as well.
Now I'm going to call on Cynthia with your hand up. You can unmute yourself. Cynthia Jattel. You're on mute if you can unmute yourself. Okay, while we wait for Cynthia, there is a question in the chat that says, Megan asks, where can we find the list of the projects, specifically the priority 1 projects?
Again, I'll take that question. I'll note we made a capital projects and planning made a presentation to the school board in August at a board work session as part of the documents that were submitted to the board to consider. We noted all of the projects. It's about 35 to 40 page document listing all of the priority 1 projects and the associated costs and what schools are being performed at. You can go to that work session to look at that. In addition, we'll be updating the school board here next week, and we're providing that document again to the school board. So you'll have the opportunity to look at that September 29th. It'll be a document presented also on September 29th. We've made some minor revisions to the document we provided in August.
Cynthia says she's unable to unmute. I'm going to try that again. Allow Mike. And Cynthia, can you unmute now? Because it shows that you can. Cynthia, could you put your question in the chat, and then we will, because something seems to be not working on your end or on our end, but you're not unmuting.
Tina, there looks like there's a question from Isaac for Richard. Who are the third-party consultants, Richard, that recommended these projects?
Third-party consultants we utilized in 2020 was the Cezanne Environmental Group. And we did have a facilities condition assessment done in 2014 as well. That was Ming Analysis. And we've really taken and combined those 2 reports. In addition, we had some work done in 2018 by McKinstry as well. And so we've really utilized all 3 of these consultants and their recommendations to Seattle Public Schools to formulate our BTA 5 levy ask.
So we have another question in the chat that says, can you speak to how and when equity considerations are part of the decision about what projects are selected and what ends up on the ballot? I believe that is also a question for Richard.
Thank you, Tina. And I'm going to ask that Becky Asensio, who is our K-12 planning manager and helps formulate the levy ask for our BTA and our BEX levies, address that question. Becky?
Thank you, Richard. Yes, we use a racial equity toolkit that our school district has put together that asks us questions as we work through data. And we do that every time we are looking at data and trying to make decisions about what that data is telling us. And then we also use equity analysis that's done by our REA department, research and evaluation. I can't remember their exact name, that they update every year that takes into account demographics, poverty, and how well students do. And that is information that we also use to know which schools have higher needs. So we use that throughout the whole planning process.
Okay, and I'm going to come back to you in a minute, Mike. I'm going to read Cynthia's question because we couldn't unmute her. Cynthia would like to ask about the clean energy resolution that will require $1.3 billion to fully implement by 2040. How much of this levy is dedicated to implementation of the resolution in terms of decarbonization?
So I'll take that question, Tina, and I'll just note that, I'm going to go back a little bit and say Seattle Public Schools is very much aware of our energy use and the impact that it has upon the environment. And I can proudly say our BEX4 schools are some of the highest performing schools in the state of Washington, with energy use indexes in the teens to the low 20s, and the low 20s are really the landmark historical buildings. Our new facilities that are total replacements are down in the low teens, and if we had solar arrays on those buildings, they would be considered net zero buildings. As part of our BEX5 capital levy, we are implementing a replacement school at John Rogers Elementary School that will be a net zero facility. We are currently in the selection of architects for that project. We will spend 2 years designing that project, and then 2 years constructing it, and it will open in 2025 and will be Seattle Public Schools' first net zero school. I'll also note that with part of the clean energy resolution that was passed by the school board in February, it discusses the formation of a task force. And the task force is currently being formed at this moment in time, with applications going to be solicited in October for a November to begin meeting in November. One of the objectives of that task force will be to prioritize projects so that we get to net zero as a district by the year 2040, and that we are off of fossil fuels by the year 2040. We believe that this information is going to be critical to making good decisions as we move forward, because we know that some projects will be able to reduce carbon emissions faster than other projects, and we want to be able to spend our resources where we'll have the biggest impact and address the lowest hanging fruit initially. And so we're looking forward to working with that task force to help guide us. We have included some seed money in our BTA5 capital levy to begin implementing these clean energy projects. And approximately $1 million has been included, and to address some of the task force, but we really look at the task force developing a list that's prioritized, and then implementation beginning heavily in our BEX6 capital levies. So hope that addresses a plan, but I will say Seattle Public Schools is very committed to reducing our carbon footprint. And this is something that we've been working on since 2014.
Okay, next I'm going to go to Mike McDonald's question in the chat. He's asking about access to the reports from Meng Analysis and others, the reports that were done, the facilities master plan, I think is what he's looking for. And I think that we will be posting that once it's been approved by the board, Richard.
If he's looking for us to post the recent Cezanne report, I'm not sure that we can make that ADA accessible. It's a rather large document. The best way to would probably be to request a copy of that, and we can print a hard copy of that if he's looking for that document, Tina.
Mike, I believe that's the document you were looking for. We used to use Meng for it, and this year they use Cezanne. He says thank you. Any other questions? You can either raise your hand or put them in chat.
Tina, we have a question from Melissa. Can you speak to how and when, oh, we did that one, right? How and when equity considerations were part of it?
Yes. Yeah, we did that one.
All right, because I really like that question. Maybe we can answer it.
Is there any anything you want to say about that as relates to EP&O?
I just think that when we developed the equity tiering, it was about really thinking carefully about underrepresented students and those historical impacts on those students over time, and trying to really focus on who are we serving in each building. So while some of it's about students living in poverty, it's also about students of color, students experiencing homelessness, students who are English language learners. All of those are really components that go into that equity tier methodology. So I see we have another question, so I'll turn it back over to you, Tina.
It's a question about, could you please clarify where to find the list of recommended projects that was presented in August? Will the list be in the minutes, and what was the date of the meeting? I am currently looking for the link to that, and we'll post it. It is in the board work session for August 11th, Richard, is that correct?
Yep, August 11th. And it was one of the two documents. We had a high-level summary document, and then we provided the specific projects that made up that high-level summary document as well. So that you should see two documents. You can go to the board work session, and you're able to access those documents. I did that just literally less than a week ago. So I know it's up there on our web.
And I'm looking for that link, and I'll put it here in the chat.
And then I will note, we'll also be providing an updated document to the board at the September 29th work session.
So Tina, you're looking for the link. Other questions or comments from those attending?
I see one that says, where do after-school programs fit into the levies? It's a sincere need for many elementary school families. And before you answer that, I just put the link that goes directly to the board materials for August 11th. And if you click on the meeting agenda, it will download all of the materials that were shared at that meeting, or the materials that were part of that meeting. So now we'll go back to, where do after-school programs fit into the levies?
Yeah, so Megan, thank you for that question. So really, how after-school programs, they're not funded by the levies typically. So typically, if we have high poverty schools, many of them will fund after-school or before-school programs out of their federal Title I dollars, or maybe their state dollars that are similar. So they have the ability, if they receive dollars from the city's levy, they're often funding after-school programs. If they receive some federal or state grant dollars, they're often funding after-school programs. So that is typically how those are funded.
And I'm going to jump in and just also say from a facility standpoint, what we do is we design both our multi-purpose rooms and our gymnasiums such that they can be used by after-school groups. We do put a small kitchenette area in the multi-purpose room that snacks can be served on it after school, includes a refrigerator, sink. So we do make provisions in all of our elementary schools, our new elementary schools and our modernized schools to meet the needs of our after-school programs.
Other questions? Melissa pointed out that the board agenda for the work session has very long amount of attachments, and the BTA levy was part 2. So the list of projects is at the very end, the last several pages. Anything else?
I think that we just want to tell everyone how much we appreciated them joining us tonight. Carlos and Richard as other presenters, if you want to express your gratitudes as well. Thank you for coming out. We know that it takes time in your schedule to make this a priority, and we appreciate that. And we appreciate you supporting Seattle Public Schools by coming and asking these questions.
And I'll echo that comment, Jolynn, and then I'll just say we are having another meeting on Thursday of this week as well for the public to take additional public input, and so with and opportunity to ask questions. So, but again, as Jolynn said, we do appreciate your feedback.
Let me just finalize that by saying, that there's been a huge increase in the past on this technology, trying to support everybody, and will be, amazing for to bring this technology and how we increase education and make it better. It is very important. It is a big portion of this levy, and I appreciate you guys' support. Thank you.
I am going to put the direct link to the feedback form into the chat, but you can also find it on that levy information page. There's a message here from Melissa Palethorpe, who is with Schools First, soliciting help. If you guys are interested, please contact them.
Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thank you. I'm going to end the meeting now.
There was one student that I was talking to during a Teams meeting telling me that she wanted to be president. She's looking at things that she feels, are broken in our society, and she seeks to make the changes. And I want to be that support person for her so that she can realize those dreams. My name is Jenny Miller, and I work for Seattle Public Schools Native Ed. During COVID, hardly, and a lot of children haven't experienced online learning, and parents, there's varying degrees of tech savvy from 0 to I work at Microsoft. So I was happy to connect with all of their families and really listen to see what were the needs of my community. The same lessons that I'm learning, like, with my own family inside, and being kind and caring with each other during this hard time for everyone, is what I'm taking outside to families as well. And celebrating all of even small successes is important. I've reached out to over 200 families. I've called them. And just ask them how their online learning is going, and just really taking the time to listen to families. There's a lot of mistrust and generational trauma, and there's a lot of healing that needs to be done. And I'm happy to be part, if I am part of that healing process, so that they can connect with staff at Seattle Public Schools as someone who's Native and somebody that they can trust. I'm LU, or traditional name is Unabin. And I've been in Seattle. I was born in Seattle and lived here all my life. The Aleuts live in the Aleutian chain by Alaska, and my grandmother came from St. Paul Island. During World War II, the Aleuts were forced off of those islands and put into work camps in Anchorage. She left and luckily was able to escape that because many Aleuts died, and she came here to Seattle. They share the heartbreaking stories of their concerns of their children, being behind or not growing social emotionally, the difficulties that they're facing as a family during COVID. Knowing where I'm coming from, telling them what I've experienced and listening really does alleviate that stress that families are feeling. They're able to be empowered and do the things that they want to do with their life and complete their goals.
For more about the Seattle Public Schools Native American Education Program, go to www.seattleschools.org/NativeEd.
Hi guys, welcome to the Red Panda exhibit here at Woodland Park Zoo. My name is Jamie and I'm one of the keepers here that takes care of Carson, our 6-year-old red panda. Carson's actually 5 years old, but we're coming up pretty close to his birthday, so we're gonna call him 6, which is about average age for a red panda. Carson's lived here since he's 2, and he has kind of a curious personality. He likes to run around his exhibit. He loves to play with enrichment boxes, hide in things, jump out. These are things that typically he does in his holding room, so it's not stuff that you'll actually see him do on exhibit. Mostly what you will see him do on his habitat is climbing up trees, sleeping, foraging for grass and bamboo. He likes to forage and he really loves bamboo. So his favorite time of the day is at the end of the day when I bring him his bamboo. We grow bamboo here especially for the red pandas. Red pandas would eat and be grazing on bamboo the entire time that they're awake sometimes, which isn't long. Red pandas typically sleep about 19 hours a day. So Carson is a little more energetic than most red pandas.
True or false? Red pandas snort like pigs. False. Red pandas actually make sounds like a tweet, known as twittering.
Well, the main part of their diet is bamboo. They also seasonally will eat different things such as fruit and other leaves and flowers, and they may actually eat small birds, small mammals, eggs, or they may dig for some bugs. So often you'll see, especially this time of year, them more on the ground digging in the dirt looking for bugs. Red pandas were just recently discovered to have 2 species in their family. It was once thought that they were subspecies. Carson belongs to the species called, also known as fulgens. And they're found primarily in parts of Asia, such as Nepal, India, Bhutan, Myanmar, and the southern part of China. There are thought to be only about 25,000 red pandas left in the wild. That has a lot to do with habitat loss and the pet trade. They're very cute. Anybody would want them as a pet, but they actually really don't make pets. And it's one of the things that is reducing their numbers in the wild.
True or false? Red pandas are part of the raccoon family. False. Although they used to be considered related to raccoons, researchers have now placed red pandas into their own family, Aluridae. They have no living relatives, and their nearest fossil ancestors lived 3 to 4 million years ago.
Some really cool things that red pandas have adapted to. They're a really ancient species. They're about 4 million years old, and they lived when giant mammals used to live in the earth, and they were very small. So they developed something called a false thumb. And this is where our thumbs would be. It's just a bone, and it helps them hold things. So because they eat things like bamboo, they will grab the bamboo and pull it towards their face to eat it. And this kind of allows them to stay up in the trees where it was safe for them back then.
True or false? Red pandas are smaller relatives of giant pandas. False. Red pandas share a name but are not closely related to the larger black and white bears.
So a lot of people think that red pandas and giant pandas are closely related because they share the same name. But actually, red pandas are not really closely related to any species here on Earth. Their closest relatives are going to be raccoons and skunks. But giant pandas and red pandas, because they share the same diet of bamboo, kind of share the same name and kind of some of the same adaptations. So giant pandas also have the false thumbs.
Conservation tips. Reduce your carbon footprint to help protect against climate change by making sustainable choices in your daily life.
Thank you for joining. And if you would like to help red pandas in the wild, a great place to start is the Red Panda Network. So if you visit their webpage or their Facebook page or Instagram, there's lots of different ways in which you can get involved in helping red pandas in the wild.
Support your zoo. Woodland Park Zoo takes part in the Red Panda Species Survival Plan, helping to sustain red panda populations in zoos as well as the Red Panda Network, which helps save red pandas in the wild.
Have you ever felt like nobody was there? Have you ever felt forgotten in the middle of nowhere? Have you ever felt like you could disappear? Like you could fall and no one would hear? So let that lonely feeling wash away. 'Cause maybe there's a reason to believe you'll be okay. 'Cause when you don't feel strong enough to stand, you can reach out your hand. And someone will come running, and I know, to take you home. Even when the dark comes crashing through, when you need a friend to carry you, and when you're broken all around, you will be found. So let the sun come streaming, as you reach up and you rise again. Lift your head and look around. You will be found. You will be found. You will be found. You will be found.
You will be found. COVID-19
quarantine has made me feel really disconnected from the people and the things that I love.
I'm missing out on my senior year and seeing all my friends and doing all the fun senior stuff we do at Garfield.
In quarantine, it's been hard not to be able to give my grandparents a hug.
I lost out on the opportunity to play baseball.
During quarantine, it was really hard to be alone for so long.
Online school has helped me feel less alone.
I was able to volunteer with an organization that I really like.
I'm grateful for the teachers who have been trying their hardest.
School gives me some purpose in my day.
We get to see our sisters more. There's a place where we don't have to feel alone. And every time that you call out, you're a little less alone. If you only say a word, across the silence, your voice is heard. Oh, someone will come running. Oh,
I was able to connect with my parents during
someone will come running. Even when the dark comes crashing through, when you need a friend to carry you, and when you're running on the ground, you will be found. So the sun comes streaming in, and to reach up and rise again. If you only look around, you will be found. You will be found. You will be found. The shadows, the morning is breaking, all is new, all is new. We stand on the empty, and suddenly I see that all is new, all is new. You are not alone, you are not alone, you are not alone, you are not alone. You are not alone. You are not alone. You are not alone. Even when the dark comes crashing through, when you need someone to carry you, when you're broken on the ground, you will be found. So when the sun comes streaming in, 'cause you'll reach up and you'll rise again. If you only look around, you will be found. Even when the sun comes crashing through, you will be found. You need someone to carry you. You will be found. You will be found.
Mask wearing helps to stop the spread of COVID-19. Students and staff must wear a mask in SPS buildings and classrooms. The mask needs to fit above your nose and below the chin and fit tightly against the face. Learn more about our health and safety protocols at www.seattleschools.org/resources/health.
At 4:31 p.m. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. We would like to acknowledge that we are on the ancestral lands and traditional territories of the Puget Sound Coast Salish people. For the record, I will call the roll. Director DeWolf.
Present.
Director Dury will not be joining us tonight. Director Hampson.
Here.
Thank you. Director Harris? Director Rankin?
Here.
Director Rivera-Smith?
Present.
This is Director Hersey. We're holding today's meeting in a hybrid format with directors, staff, and members of the public here in person, with remote access also available via Microsoft Teams and phone, consistent with the governor's proclamation on open public meetings. The public is being provided remote access today via Microsoft Teams and phone. Because we also have some joining us remotely, I'll remind everyone on the phone or Teams to please remain muted when you are not speaking. There will not be a public comment opportunity. Also, for those directors and staff in person, please mute your microphone when you are not speaking. Please also leave microphones in their stands and speak directly into them when you are speaking to ensure that those joining us remotely can hear us. The first work session this evening is a budget work session. At the conclusion of the first work session, we will move into the superintendent search firm interviews. I will now hand it over to Assistant Superintendent of Business and Finance, Jolynn Berge, for the presentation.
Thank you, Director Hersey.
In alignment with last time, please, for the sake of the presentation so that we can have a full and open discussion with all the information possible, let's try to hold our question until the given intersections, and I promise I will get to you.
I think those intersections will probably be after item number 2, ESSER spending. Deputy Superintendent Gannon, I believe that is you.
Thank you, Jolynn. Good afternoon, directors. Again, for the record, I'm Rob Gannon, Deputy Superintendent. We have a number of slides to work with you, and as Director Hersey mentioned, we're happy to take questions, but I think there will be logical points, engage discussion. This first slide is, like in our last work session, a repeat of how we propose to frame our discussion and also the work we take into the budget development. So this is almost an exact replica of the slide that you saw last time. I just want to roll through them quickly because as we look at some significant challenges in our budget, we want to evaluate some of the options we have to consider and how to use those in concert to address the potential of a budget shortfall in the out years. We will talk in some specificity on a number of these issues, but I want to acknowledge at the outset that we continue to look within the organization about what is the right approach to each of these measures and how can we bring forward meaningful analysis, ultimately to the superintendent for his final consideration, engaging with staff, preparing to go out to community, and then importantly, presenting budget options for this board to ultimately consider and approve. So I think what I'm also trying to forecast is we have some good discussions underway, but we do not yet have a lot of robust analysis to present to all of you. So we will look at the enrollment recovery picture and try to give some additional explanation there. We will talk about how we can approach central office reductions. We'll again revisit the use of the Economic Stabilization Fund and respecting Director Harris's comments, we will not refer to it as the rainy day fund. All that did last time was precipitate lots of additional moisture in the air. It's been a long day already, and all of you know it's been a long week already. So, and then we'll continue to present the board options to consider about how we could approach potential revenue enhancements by seeking relief from the state, or conversely, or in concert, how we would accompany that with appropriations. So you'll see this slide again later in the presentation. Again, us, I hope, frame our discussion and launch us into our next budget work session where we can additional detail. So Jolynn will take the next couple of slides, and I think from there forward, we'll be bouncing back and forth, trying to present information from each of our perspective, but honing in on the same points regardless.
Okay, thank you. Next slide is one that we've seen before, the 22-23 draft budget development calendar. Not too drafty at this point, pretty set. So we have dates that we're working towards in January. That critical date of February 28th for budget allocations out to schools means any budget direction on school staffing has to be determined in those January meetings. ESSER spending. We were asked to give an update on ESSER spending. I know the slide is small, so you might want to look at it in your packet. Or if you're online, the documents are posted and you'll be able to make this larger. Basically, what this is showing that in total, we had $145 million in ESSER revenue. That covers ESSERs 1, 2, and 3. And what we've shown is actual expenditures. So we are done spending ESSER 1, and it shows by line item how those dollars were spent and in which year the expenditure occurred. And we finished that up in 21-22. We had a little bit of money. In ESSER 1, there's a private school set aside where private schools were allocated some of the money by law, and they determined their timeline to spend. So that's what made that difference. And then you can also see the ESSER 2 fully spent out. That's the bottom line, very bottom of the slide. So you can see that we have spent all $41.3 million of ESSER 2, with the majority of that, I should not say transportation continuity, I should say school continuity. So continuity of operations is the line item that ESSER 2 should be showing on for that $30 million. There was also some dollars for HVAC and PPE, that sort of expenditure. And those were for 2021, so it's the year that closed August 30th. In addition to that, in 2021, we have spent $10 million, or just right under $10 million out of ESSER 3, with the majority of that expenditure coming in the health and safety line. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that directors might have. I've collapsed. This is a subset of the worksheet that you've seen before. I've just only included the line items that had expenditures. If you don't see a line item on there, it's because they did not have an expenditure yet.
Directors, if you have questions, signify by raising your hand. Director Rankin.
Thank you. It's just a clarification. In the ESSER 2 column, it says school program continuity, transportation continuity. And you had said actually.
Okay. One line above in the school program continuity.
So does that include transportation, or is the transportation the line in the ESSER 3 box?
Transportation will be the line in ESSER 3 only.
Okay. Thanks.
At this point. All right, let's keep rolling.
All right, just one more comment. We get a lot of questions about, well, what else? The rest of the budget is fully committed. And in fact, we've had to reallocate a couple different times, moving funds from planned learning, engagement supports, other wellness supports into the health and safety line. So that is continuing to be monitored. The next time that we'll see this updated for actual expenditures would likely be in the December or January meeting, where we will show the slide that has expenditures on it, everything that's budgeted and everything that's actual. So we'll bring that back in that timeline.
Directors, if I could add a bit of comment on this slide, not in its detail, but just in why we think it is important for us to continue to return to the ESSER allocations. We hear often from community and sometimes from schools that you have ample federal dollars. Why are you not using them to address a particular need? And while that is a fair question, and we want to continue to be responsive to those questions, we also want to demonstrate that our ESSER funding has been allocated, and we're continuing to use more and more of the ESSER funds to address the health and safety issues that continue throughout the ongoing pandemic response. So that's our major point that we want to continue to express to community. We're always happy to show how these dollars are being expended. That's not evident in detail on this slide, but that is a place we're ready to go if necessary. And then we just want to acknowledge that we want to re-enter this into our slide deck as we progress in the budget, because we know new members will be coming on the board and we want to refresh their or give them a fresh understanding of where we are on this. So this is not to rehash information with all of you, which I think you're beginning to have a depth of understanding on, but it is to speak to community at large and the new members that will be coming.
Can you just clarify through what point in time are these funds intended to be used, if you didn't already?
So we have budget plans, I believe, that use those through 23-24. Most all of our dollars, though, I think will be spent in 22-23. I think we're one of the few districts that spent all of 1 and 2 already. I don't think any other district in the state that I'm aware of, at least not the large districts, are spending at the same pace that we are. So we have had firm plans in place. We continue to update and iterate on those plans. But like I said, at this point, the dollars basically are overcommitted and we're continuing to have to make adjustments.
Hi, can you explain maintenance of equity? What does that go towards?
And again, I think I dropped my categories in one line below because the dollars in that line should be on the hourly support, the school lunch protocols, and the contact tracing. Maintenance of effort is a line that we're holding because there's a federal requirement sitting in ESSER 3 that says that you have to increase funding for your highest poverty schools and maintain that, even if they're even if certain things change in those schools, like special ed programming or special population enrollments. So that is a requirement that we've talked about once before. It is a federal requirement. We did get that waived. We worked pretty hard in the budget office to work nationally to allow us to not have to, we got a waiver for this school year, but that requirement's still sitting on us for next year. We think that that is about $2 or $3 million of cost for us that will have to ensure schools, regardless of anything that's going on, maintain certain levels of funding. So it's still in development by the feds. That's all I can really say to it. It's brand new. Not a lot known about it.
Heard you say maintenance of effort. Is this maintenance of equity?
It's here? Maintenance of equity. Maintenance of equity. There's also maintenance of effort as another federal requirement.
Okay. And then so since it sounds like some of these things are shifted or somewhere maybe not, could you maybe send out a corrected version? I'm not sure where to tell what should be where.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Is at this time. All right, let's keep going.
All right, so next we have an update. We'll move into the actual budget work. This slide will be our new baseline. So this was our awareness. When we became aware of the enrollment issue, we saw this slide for the first time at the work session on September 29th. This slide's just a refresher that at that point in time that we knew that we had a $28 million enrollment issue. And we had issues into the out years. So then as we start looking at potential solutions, I'll just highlight the things that have changed. So we have closed 2021. So the ending fund balance is now firm at $55,034,483. The last time we met, I believe we had a placeholder, if you look back in your binders, of $55 million. In addition, the ESSER backfill remains unchanged. The enrollment loss dollar figure remains unchanged. The Economic Stabilization Fund has been updated by about $300,000. And if you recall, that is the most recent closed fiscal year. That number needs to equal 4% of expenditures. And so once 2021 actual expenditures were known, we we're able to update that number. Capital funding remains the same. Reductions to central admin and district programs remains the same, as do the next two line items as well on this slide. Bob?
So again, to cast this slide, this was an initial attempt to identify the magnitude of what we could consider to address the forecasted budget deficit. The updates that Jo Lynn gave you are numerical, but there is no substance change in this slide. And subsequent slides will again show the detail about how we could consider this in a sense of the parameters or the options we might consider. So with that, we're going to take one slight deviation in the next slide, and this relates to the enrollment picture. So in our last budget work sessions, there were a number of questions about where is enrollment, how is it funded, what would it mean if we were to forecast enrollment recovery. So I won't recap all of the questions, but we wanted to bring this forward in broad terms to show the lines and their relationship, and then make two important points. And so I'll let Jo Lynn add some detail here, but the first thing that I would point out is that, as we all know, we are dealing with an enrollment shortfall that brings us to about 50,000 students. We were a district that had been budgeting at a level of 54,000 students, and then we made an adjustment to 52,000 students, roughly. So right now, we have to consider what our enrollment will be in the fall as we build toward the next budget year. There are choices here, and we need to begin to wrestle with the outcomes of what those choices are. In specific terms, one view would be to say that we should anticipate conservatively enrollment in the fall to come at 50,000, recognizing that right now we're staffed at a level for 52,000. And how would our staffing allocations be adjusted to accommodate that new baseline figure in the fall? Now, there are different scenarios that could obviously occur. We could see some enrollment recovery. We could see it come back to 52,000, in which case we would be rightly staffed, right? Or at least staffed according to our budgeted projections as they are now, and anticipating a return in that enrollment. But we do not have any certainty that we will see 52,000 students come back in the fall. So there's a question of which direction should we go? If we go with a more conservative approach, we will have to look at a staffing adjustment. That staffing adjustment just right sizes our budget, if you will. It does not address the shortfall that we're discussing. That's the major point that I wanted to make. Supporting point, which I'd like to just put out and make sure we have a common understanding, is that if enrollment were to grow significantly, that does not solve our budget challenge either. For sake of argument, if our enrollment were to grow to 58,000 students, we would get an appropriate allocation or a commensurate allocation from the state, but we would also expend at that level. So the net would be a zero gain, right? So there is no strong return on getting more students because we don't capitalize on any core efficiencies. We still have essentially the same types of costs, and we expend at levels that we're already conditioned and prepared to spend at. So those are the 2 points that I'd like to make. I won't recast them, but Jo Lynn, if you want to add any clarity, or this might be another point where we'll take some questions from you.
Any questions at this point? All right, are you sure? Go ahead.
For sure. sorry, my eyes are popping a little bit. Overstaffed by 275 and 170 are in special education. Okay, the last time I heard numbers, we were overstaffed by about 200 FTE and 74 were in special education. Have we lost more students that lead to those being over, or what?
For the special ed IAs. So I went back and we added in the special ed IAs. So the first number that you heard was just straight certificated staff. And then we went back and included the special ed IAs because they make up both part of the revenue issue and the expenditure issue.
Gotcha. Okay.
And
so
it's a sizable number.
It sure is. So the 170 number is the certificated special education teachers plus IAs.
That's right.
Does it include ESAs?
No. Just special ed teachers and special ed IAs.
I have a lot more questions about that, but it's not budget related, so I will hold my comments.
Any other questions? You have another?
And about the potential solutions, and maybe we're going to go into more detail, you said? Okay.
All right, moving on. This is a slide that we have seen before, and you will.
So this slide is roughly parallel to a slide we presented in our last budget work session. The estimated amount column parallels what you saw on a previous slide in this presentation and is used as a construct to give illustration to the scenarios that we list in A and B. So I'd like to walk you through scenario A and then by comparison B to give you a sense again of the types, or excuse me, the parameters we might consider as we then build the detail to go towards our budget. So in the first line, you see the ending fund balance brought forward as a core component of addressing the FY 22-23 gap, so 55 million. The ESSER dollars, as Jolynn earlier indicated, are there. The enrollment loss now slightly updated. Excuse me, the enrollment loss is brought there. The economic stabilization fund, consistent with the slide we presented in the last work session, here we're showing using the amount that is above the 3% floor that we have in policy. So we would bring 9.7 million to bear. The capital funding would be brought in as previously discussed. The next line in reductions to central admin, again, we continue to consider how we would go about this at the Stanford Center and looking across the various support and programs we have in this building. We're using now a placeholder of $2 million. That is not to say that is the right figure. That is useful in this scenario. It is also more achievable in the sense that there are a lot of critical positions in this building supporting programmatic work and leadership and curriculum and all sorts of very important programs. $2 million would continue to take a toll on the services provided in this building. We're bringing that forward as a more realistic or achievable number were we to approach reductions here. We have added, for sake of this illustration and this option, more to the investments in new priorities. We moved that to $5 million, recognizing that there are still many things that we may consider as critical to advancing the strategic plan, other endeavors and initiatives that the board and the superintendent would like to pursue. And we continue to have the placeholder of the transportation change in this scenario. So were we to use that combination of things, we would arrive at a total of just less than $60 million. And that would leave us a deficit to address with some very difficult programmatic changes and other reductions to consider of $18 million. One of the things that was discussed, at least in general terms at our last work session, was could we pursue one-time relief from the state in granting us additional funding to offset the enrollment loss. Were we to be successful in that effort, then $28 million would be restored, and we would then have $9 million left in balance. And then I would argue that in this scenario, the prudent thing to do would be to return or consider returning that excess back into the economic stabilization reserve. We'll go into some additional, we'll play this out a little bit more in a subsequent slide. Scenario B, by comparison, does all of that, but shows that if we do not get the relief that we might seek from the state, then we have that $18 million deficit to address in the coming budget year. So I think if we jump to the next slide, you'll see this in a larger context, and I hope it, for purposes of our effort here, makes the illustration more clear. So I will explain the scenario A, and then what Jolynn was just gesturing to me about was the scenario B is missing a column on this slide. So I can speak to that, and we'll send you all an updated slide. So scenario A then brings the 22-23 year forward. And you would see again that with state relief, we would have a positive balance of $9.7 million. When we look in the out years, if we were to return that 9.7 either to the reserve or apply it in the future year, we would have $39 million in our stabilization reserve. And in 23-24, we would have a $36 million shortfall, absent any other significant reductions. And in the out year, 24-25, without any plan to address it, we would have a $92 million shortfall. Option B, again, the 22-23 column is as shown in the previous slide. We would have an $18 million shortfall without state relief. Have $9 million reserve. Down the reserve. Takes slightly larger problem in 23-26 million. Option A. And the missing column is illustration by outcome of a 9 deficit. So this is meant to illustrate that with state relief upcoming materialized challenges doesn't serious challenges to without state assistance, loss recovery, problem either than very carefully about how we do targeted and how very aggressively other revenue. And to see if I add anything, then next slide, give a view to opportunity, challenges. That's
I'll just emphasize the point that 5 numbers are the same based on what we. Next slide, together. Next slide was put together to provide some context about, in broad terms, by program, where are we at as far as our expenditures exceeding state revenues, and where really have we made choices? So where you see a deficit, it's where levy comes in to fill that gap. So on the first line, it's showing our certificated classroom teachers. And you can see that the state is funding us for 2,630 FTE. And we have staffed 2,660 FTE. So we actually have 4 they allocate to the expenditure line item. The expenditures are far outpacing state revenue. So what I want to say is that this slide demonstrates something that is a funding detail that's not well known. When the state fixed McCleary, they really fixed teacher salaries only. So they made a large step forward, state allocation more closely aligned with what's actually paying certificated teachers. And they lowered our levy amount by an offset. What they didn't address is the other two classifications and staffing for, which is classified staff and administrators. Those two have remained funded at an average of 60 or 70 cents. So that's part of the whole dynamic about when the state made that step forward. There were other steps that didn't come. And there is a compensation committee right now required by legislation that is starting to meet. All of the WASDA's on it, WASBO's on it, guys leading to talk about what is the next step for compensation and our teacher salaries, frankly, keep where they need to be. So teacher salaries is about keeping pace. The other two are about you had never fixed them. You never did anything about those. So talk about basic education then. The state revenue is covering about 86. Look at special education. And so this is our certificated staff, our classified staff, but everyone that's in the special education program for K-12, see that we're 500 FTE above what the state allocating to us, $78 million above what the state allocates to us. So 49% of our expenditures are being covered. So a larger district sitting in that program, which is something that we've known at this district and that other districts recognize. These numbers and figures look similar, except for maybe in the bilingual one, other districts. CTE programs, they're smaller. They typically have underspent and will typically come in at about a break-even point for both programs. They're on here for not on here from my perspective. Then we get to bilingual education. The state only funds certificated staff in bilingual education. The state does not fund any IAs. We do allocate IAs out to our bilingual. So we have 230 allocated, and bilingual education funded by the state. This is the budget for 2022. I can tell you that the actual amount that we ran a deficit in bilingual ed 2021. The next line item is school. This is the front office staff and our principal. There are other people who are staffing in our school that are classified positions. 246 allocation, $35 million, 68% of that ratio. Same information provided for classified staff district 5. These are like for our folks, our gardeners, trades and crafts folks. For 57 over they allocate. And this is where you can really see that classified funding issue. The state's funding 7 positions over, but it's a ratio of 49% that the state is actually funding. Then we get to central. These are budget office payroll. That 75 positions, and we're funded about 50. So the reason that we're demonstrating large categories because that $18 million has to be adjusted somewhere. These are where we spend dollars in at a level large enough to solve an 18.
Lynn has this great ability to hand it over to me and be the difficult talking point. So I'd like to cast this in both a neutral light because this represents both challenge we face. How do we consider where to begin to make reductions, odd categories, where the district has made important choices to fund at these. So we recognize that those will be hard decisions, senior leadership to make, hard decisions for consider, and hard for our to adjust to work. I say this can be viewed as a neutral slide because this also presents, indicated, the opportunities for say, here is where in our district underfunded by state allocation. How do we augment that funding? How do we go about that? Still have to do is recognize that in the very near term, without one-time state relief enrollment loss, have an 18, have a significant shortfall in the upcoming budget. The out years, we have an even larger problem, and to consider deeper reductions on these lines, find revenue support. I'll also say that the simplistic tool that we may hear about as suggestions don't really address the needs of our district. So a common refrain might be, well, just cut teacher salaries, that's how you solve it. Well, we have to recognize right from the start that we value our instructors, teachers, and our staff a great deal, and we need to remain competitive in a competitive side. That's no good. Long run, a broad swath cut in central office, even though that gives some relief, some not. Similarly, we can't simply take a 8% reduction across all categories. That would be a problem, but essentially stretch any area, making them more find opportunities to improve the services we offer even. So this slide offers no recipe, this slide offers no remedy. It does give us an opportunity category steps. Last thing I want to say is Lynn articulated some clear areas where special education is funded, and we are staffed by state's rendering, and we know that we face. Is there an opportunity? And doubtless, how do we go about that? Challenge. Bilingual education is another. Each of these also has clear ties to what we also enshrined in practice with operating environment. To undo that challenge, right? Not to cast labor in a negative light, management and labor. But there will be I don't want to cast that as anti-labor, quite the opposite. Challenge that is going to be able talking about shadow that. When we take on this challenge, if ever to labor interactions, have to find a productive way. Respect good.
Okay. Directors, any questions? Director Harris.
Thank you. Want to go back a couple of slides to $5 million three-tier busing. I have heard nothing in the last couple of years about academic medical studies about the efficacy of our children, at least children. And I'd like to know what bang for our buck and what the results of studies are and where they are on the and anytime we're talking about the three-tier system, I desperately need the data to know that. Not sure that either of you were here, and that's fair. It was a difficult call, notwithstanding bus driver or contractor shortages. Did it for the right reason, and we're still waiting for that analysis. So I'll fight like the person that I am without that information. The other question comes up. This is going to be very, very big. Here. Are two of you all using PASS and SEA right now to learn them up, just like you're learning it? Because I don't want to wait until September of next year to sign a bargain. Thank you.
Director Harris, I'll respond to your second question, and I'll turn to Jacqueline for her insights on. The simple answer to your second question, are we engaging with PASS? Are we engaging with SEA leadership? I would say we have started that process. I met with PASS leadership yesterday, and walked them through the slides that we made as a presentation to board in the last work session, and we have made clear, and they are very receptive to ongoing discussions about how to understand the depth of our challenges, enter into a space where we jointly consider might be the right approach. We have started that with PASS. I met with SEA, leadership of SEA Monday, and made a similar offer to them that we could begin not to bargain, share information about how we see the budget challenges ahead, not to forecast the path or the solution that we're seeking, common understanding of that challenge. And I also in SEA leadership to come with the hard questions so that how do we understand these, how do their economic analysis, so that we aren't entering into actual bargain, tested space. So in short, we are meeting with both of those groups ongoing several weeks.
I heard that you offered. Have we received a response to that offer yet?
Director Hersey, to be more precise, I met with President Motter and Vice President Hawkins and said I was very eager to get this conversation underway. They responded, yes, we're very eager to start that. So it's a matter now of scheduling that session and making the team.
That is one news. Thank you. Director Rankin, you had a question?
Oh.
So we have asked Ashley Davies to come in December and give a little details about what the transportation line item meant. And I was here when we moved the bell time. So there's two different things that get conflated in transportation, right? There's the bell time flip where we moved all the elementaries to the earliest start time and the high schools at the same time or near about used to have 3 start times and we flapped to 2 start times. This is only talking about moving back to 3 start times. So I will say my memory recalls the third group is want to go to the earlier time necessarily. Elementary school, there was pros and cons, right, for that. We do know is that in that bar that it was going to cost money to go 2 tiers from 2. Because what it means is the difference of one bus driver can do 1 route a day, and that's it, because there's not enough time between start times and start times. Can't go back and get the have 3 tiers of start time. 2, have time enough to do 1 route, take kids to A, and then you have time enough to take kids to school. Start time is that's what creates the safety. That you have 400 buses, and, right, and they can cover all of the routes, or you can have 300 buses, and that's where the safety is. But Ashley Davies will be fun to give more information about that. With the UW stuff that we get from Dr. Eric.
Lincoln.
Thank you. I am very glad that Ashley will be here in December to talk about this. I was going to say also, as to what Dr. Harris said, I cannot entertain a return to 3 tiers as a budgetary solution without understanding what the impact is and how we're going to look at that, knowing and having been heavily involved in the other changes about the broader impact that they'll have to our students and our families, but also to childcare providers, enrichment. I mean, it just is total upheaval, and it was very challenging. And the idea of going back to that gives me nightmares. But that's also the idea of going back to the 3 tiers that we had before. Maybe there's a definition that doesn't, that's not those same 3 times. But that's, again, I can't accept that as a possibility without understanding the context just about the budget. So I just wanted to really state that. Does this, in the projections out 3 years ahead, what are the assumptions about the cost of salaries and how those play out?
So projections range based have a 3% per year.
Okay, thanks. And then also with this, does this assume that the operations levy passes? That includes that money, assuming that it passes.
This would be a very
So
good
without that, it's even bleaker. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Thank you. And then in the expenditures compared to state funding, I know that this is something that is really confusing for folks about the funded FTE by the state and our actual funded FTE, and also not just the difference between those 2 numbers, but the difference between what an FTE costs to us and what the state says that it costs within those allocations. So I really appreciate this, but I think if in the hopes that we can help more people understand how these decisions are made and why they're important, that I think that might be something that will help. With the bilingual education and our numbers being like 3 times the amount that's allocated, is that because do we have certificated bilingual education staff or do we only have IAs?
We have some stuff.
Okay, so is part of this number, well, that's interesting. I guess my question is some of the difference in the two numbers, the fact that certificated staff cost more than IAs, and we're kind of,
For the state
that make
only,
sense?
the state only allocates certificated FTEs. We're over that allocation out of the gate, just on certificated staff in this program. And we also supplement with classified staff or IAs, and the state does not fund any IAs in there.
Gotcha.
So all of those are just straight above.
Okay, so that number, the 340 includes certificated and
And
IAs.
classified, yeah.
Okay, thank you, thank you. In terms of discussions with labor partners, which is obviously hugely important, something that I want to make sure that we're thinking about is how to avoid, or how to, I don't know, involve more people in, like, these aren't just labor conversations. These are conversations about what kind of education the broader community wants to provide for students. And so I think we'd be making a mistake to view these as I guess, what did I say? We need to have conversations about these in public with the public that include our labor partners and include educators and families and everybody, that don't become this sort of the district and SEA fighting each other over dollar allocations when that's maybe based in, I don't know what I'm trying to say, not based in the interests of what the community would want. This kind of goes along with comments I've made before about we have to stop talking about more or less and more about like special education is a really good example. Like it would be easy to say, well, the state's only covering 49%, so we'll just cut half of it. That's obviously not a good solution. And we know that we have, in quotes, extra staff, and we know that we have a lot of families whose students are still not being served, and we know that we want to increase inclusionary practices, and those are all going to have an impact. So how do we make sure that those conversations, that the budget's not driving the solutions, that what we all want as educators, students, and families is driving the funding? Does that make sense?
We agree. I mean, what we want to do is we want to move to a better way to serve it. And it may be a different model, but it should be better. Now, at the end of the day, I'll say that it has to balance somehow.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, a decision has to be made, and we have the dollars that we have.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I would just say also that we need to be really clear on how we approach that, because I know in the past and with other labor partners, other jurisdictions outside of us, having conversations about items that are bargaining table, side of the bargaining table, are typically frowned upon for various reasons. I know what you're suggesting is not that. The only thing that I would say is that if we are interested in doing that, we need to develop whatever that's going to look like with SEA to make sure that we are not preemptively causing more disruption than finding solutions. With that, Director Rivera's got a question.
That totally makes sense.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I actually had a question. I don't even figured out what I was trying to ask, but I will say, to follow up on this conversation here, because I absolutely agree that our funding should not be the big, at least of our services and our allocations of staff. But so I feel like we have a budget that reflects our values, but we don't have revenue that reflects our values. Is the problem. So definitely. Pounding at that revenue resource issue, and I know we are.
Director Hampson.
While those things are true that Director Incan and Director Versmith have said, we also don't currently have the outcomes that we want for our students as it pertains to either special education or bilingual education services. And we need to keep in mind that that makes us poor advocates and poor partners with our fellow districts when we are so overspent and so underperforming in our outcomes for students in special education. So we're a long ways from having something that is overspent and yet producing lovely results for our families and communities. We need to keep that in mind as well.
Cool. And I would just say, before we move on to the next piece of our agenda, that yes, we do not need to lead with budgeting, but there's nothing that is going to make this $90 million problem go away, right? And so I do just want to be clear that as we are having conversations about what we are going to do internally, I know that a lot of folks are also thinking that we need to go to the state, which I totally agree with. But before we go to the state, in order to be taken seriously, there is a large amount of cleanup that we need to do in our own books. And I think specifically the way that we push our partners at the legislature is first by showing that we are doing everything in our power to get to a point to where we can budget our books on our own. Balance our books on our own. And then we obviously have the leverage necessary. I also want to make clear for folks that if we get to a point to where we do not budget appropriately, and we do not find solutions, and we do not have the hard conversations and make the hard choices, OSPI will come and make those choices for us. And I guarantee everybody in this room would rather be in a position to where we can collaboratively find solutions to this, and even those outside of this room who might be listening, who I hope are listening, that we can find collaborative solutions to this now, because I guarantee you that the alternative is not what any of us want. So with that, I'm not sure what the next piece of our agenda is. Please.
I have heard from people listening that the sound is a little bit choppy, and that is apparently because we are not all speaking into our microphone and the sound cuts out. So just for folks